My sister Lely's wedding was about to happen, and my husband, Mark, and I pulled up to the location. The $10,000 envelope, our wedding present to Lely, was securely tucked away in Mark's jacket pocket. Furthermore, we had already paid for around 1/3 of the wedding costs. Although it was a substantial sum, we were able to afford it because of Mark's work in investment banking and my role as head of marketing. Lely was also my only sibling. I recognized my folks as soon as we entered. Dad appeared to be irritated as Mom fiddled with his tie, but I could see the smirk on his lips. They were glowing. The only word for it was that. Dad seemed a decade younger, and Mom's face was nearly beaming with joy. In my stomach, something twisted. They seemed so joyful at my wedding 5 years ago that I couldn't recall it. Sure, they'd been kind enough, but not this way, not so full of pride and happiness. I dismissed the concept in a hurry. This was no time to bring up past emotions. The ceremony proceeded flawlessly. Jake, Lely's fiancé and now husband, couldn't take his eyes off her since she looked so beautiful in her attire. I sat between Mark and my parents, attempting to ignore the nagging thought that my parents' emotions were different from theirs during my wedding, and instead concentrate on the joy of the day. The reception. The ceremony was followed by a reception. After we had eaten, drunk, and danced, the speeches began. The best man comes first. The maid of honor came next. Finally, both of my parents got to their feet. Mom softly tapped her glass. We want to thank everyone for coming today to celebrate our beloved daughter's wedding. I shifted uneasily in my seat because of the way she stressed the word beloved. Mark must have seen, since he covered my hand with his. The greatest joy of our lives has been witnessing Lely blossom into the stunning woman she is today. Dad went on. She has always been unique and brightened our house with her presence. Wondering whether I was being overly sensitive, I nodded and smiled. They were obviously in love with Lely. They cherished us both. After then, Mom took out some papers from her purse. Jake, Lely, your father, and I wanted to give you something to start your new life together, something special. Everyone could see the papers as she held them up. We're giving you our family home as a wedding present. Gasps filled the room, and then there was a roar of applause. I went cold. Mark went rigid beside me. I looked at Lely and then at my parents, hoping someone would chuckle and call it a joke. However, it wasn't. My folks were grinning with pride. Lely, too. Lely showed no signs of surprise. As she hugged Jake, who was looking at my parents with his mouth agape, she was sobbing happy tears. The home of my parents. The house with the mortgage I'd been paying for the last 5 years because my parents couldn't afford it anymore after Dad's hours got cut and Mom's arthritis made it hard for her to work full-time. I managed to plaster a smile on my face, but inside I was screaming. Not once had they mentioned giving the house to Lely. They hadn't even asked me. And I was the one paying for it. "Tessa, you okay?" Mark whispered. "Fine," I said through my teeth, still smiling as Lely and Jake made their way to the front to hug my parents. The breaking point. An hour later, I couldn't take it anymore. I found Mark by the bar. "Can we leave?" I asked quietly. He took one look at my face and nodded. "I'll get our coats." We made our excuses. Mark had an early meeting. We were so sorry. Such a beautiful wedding. Congratulations again, and left before anyone could protest too much. The second we got in the car, I burst into tears. "I can't believe they did that," I sobbed as Mark started the engine. "I've been paying that mortgage for 5 years, and they didn't even tell me they were planning this." "I know," Mark said grimly. "It's unbelievable." And Lely knew. Did you see her face? She wasn't surprised at all. I wiped my eyes angrily. This isn't about the money. I don't care about the money, but they could have talked to me first. As we drove home, memories kept flooding back. All the times my parents had shown clear favoritism toward Lely. Remember when I graduated college and they gave me a card with $50? But when Lely graduated 2 years later, they bought her a car. That wasn't right, Mark agreed. Or my 21st birthday dinner that they skipped because Lely had a volleyball game. A game? Not even a championship or anything important. The more I talked, the more examples I remembered. Each time, Lely got what she wanted, while I got overlooked or forgotten. How my parents attended all of Lely's events, but found excuses to miss mine. How they bragged about Lely's accomplishments, but barely mentioned mine. By the time we got home, I was exhausted from crying and talking. Where are your parents going to live now? Mark asked as we got ready for bed. If they're giving the house to Lely and Jake. I shrugged, pulling on my pajamas. I have no idea. That's not my problem anymore. I turned off the light and rolled over, trying to ignore the ache in my chest. The invitation. For the next 3 weeks, I went to work, came home, and tried not to think about the wedding, the house, or any of it. Then one evening, my phone rang. It was my mother. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Tessa, honey," Mom said as if nothing had happened. "We're having a family dinner this weekend. Your sister and Jake are back from their honeymoon, and we'd love for you and Mark to join us." I wanted to say no. I wanted to hang up. But some part of me, probably the stupid, hopeful part, wondered if maybe they'd apologize. Maybe they'd explain. "Fine," I said flatly. "We'll be there." Dinner at Lely's. Saturday arrived too quickly. When we pulled up, I noticed Lely's car in the driveway, along with my parents' old sedan. We walked up to the front door, and I hesitated before ringing the bell. It felt weird not using my key. But this wasn't my parents' house anymore. It was Lely and Jake's. Mom answered, all smiles. "Tessa," Mark. Come in, come in." She hugged me like nothing had happened, like she hadn't given away the house I'd been paying for without even talking to me about it. I hugged her back stiffly. Dad was in the living room with Jake, watching a game. He stood up when we entered, giving Mark a firm handshake and me a quick hug. "Where's Lely?" I asked, noticing her absence. "Oh, she's changing the curtains in the dining room," Mom said casually. "She's been redecorating all week." My blood boiled at that. 3 weeks. It had been 3 weeks since the wedding, and Lely was already changing things around like she'd owned the place for years. We walked through to the dining room. And there she was, my sister, standing on a stepladder hanging new cream-colored curtains in place of Mom's old blue ones. "Dinner's ready," Mom announced. "Everyone, sit down." We took our seats, me between Mark and Dad, with Mom and Lely across from us, and Jake at the end of the table. The food looked good, Mom's special pot roast with all the trimmings, but I had no appetite. The first 10 minutes were filled with Lely and Jake describing their honeymoon in Hawaii in excruciating detail. I picked at my food and nodded occasionally while Mark asked appropriate questions to keep the conversation going. Finally, when Lely paused to take a breath, Mom cleared her throat. "So we wanted to talk to you about something, Tessa," she said. "Well, as you know, we've given the house to Lely and Jake as their wedding present." "Yes, I noticed," I said flatly. Mom continued as if she hadn't heard the edge in my voice. "The thing is, they're a young couple starting their life together. They need their own space." I remained silent, waiting for her to get to the point. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "What your mother is trying to say," he said, "is that we can't live here with them. They need privacy." "I see," I said, still not sure where this was going. "So where are you planning to live?" Mom and Dad exchanged another look. I noticed Lely suddenly became very interested in her mashed potatoes. "Well," Mom said slowly, "we've been thinking about it, and we've decided we're going to move to your vacation home. It's the perfect size for us, and it's in a nice, quiet area." I set down my fork and knife carefully. The vacation home they were referring to was a small cottage I bought with my own money, before I even met Mark. I'd saved for years to afford it, working overtime and weekends. It was my special place, somewhere I could go to escape the city. Occasionally, I let my parents use it when they wanted a weekend away. "Let me get this straight," I said, keeping my voice level. "You gave your house, the house I've been paying the mortgage on for 5 years, to Lely, and now you think you're going to move into my vacation home without even asking me first." "Tessa," Dad said, frowning, "be reasonable. Where else are we supposed to go?" "That's not my problem," I said. "You had a house. You gave it away without consulting me, even though I've been paying for it, and now you expect me to just hand over my vacation home to you." "It's not like you use it that much," Lely chimed in. I turned to her, unable to hide my anger now. "Are you serious right now? It's my property. I bought it with my money. I get to decide who uses it and when." Mom's face had gone pale. "You can't mean you're not saying no, are you?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," I replied. "No, you are not moving into my vacation home. Not now, not ever." The table fell silent. Then Mom's face crumpled. "How can you do this to us?" she cried. "After everything we've done for you, we're your parents." "Yes," I said, "and as my parents, you might have thought to discuss this with me before giving away a house I was paying for and deciding to take over my property." "You don't have the right to refuse us," Mom said, her voice rising. "We have nowhere else to go now." "You actually have your house," I pointed out. "The one I've been paying the mortgage on for 5 years, but you gave it to Lely, so now it's your problem to figure out where to live." Lely slammed her hand on the table. "God, you're so cruel and greedy. You've always been jealous of me because Mom and Dad love me more. You've always been envious of our relationship." I stared at her, stunned by her outburst. Then I turned to her, suddenly calm. "If Mom and Dad love you so much and you love them so much, then why don't you let them live here with you? This is a 4-bedroom house. Plenty of room." Lely's mouth snapped shut. She looked away, suddenly finding her plate fascinating again. That's not the point," she mumbled. "Jake and I need our privacy. And I need my vacation home," I countered. "Sounds like we both have needs." My parents started talking over each other, telling me how wrong I was, how disappointing, how selfish. I stopped listening. I stood up and picked up my purse. "Mark, I think we're done here." The next day, my phone exploded with messages and calls from my parents and Lely. I ignored them all. Some called me selfish, some begged me to reconsider, some tried to guilt-trip me with reminders of everything they'd supposedly done for me over the years. I showed some of the messages to Mark, who shook his head in disbelief. "I think I need to block them for a while. I can't keep reading these." "Do what you need to do," Mark said, kissing the top of my head. "Take care of yourself first." So I did. I blocked their numbers and social media accounts, at least temporarily. I needed space to think, to process everything that had happened. 2 weeks passed in blissful silence. No calls, no texts, no family drama. Mark and I fell back into our normal routine. Work, home, occasional dinners with friends who didn't try to steal my property. It was nice. I was at my desk, reviewing a marketing campaign, when my phone buzzed with an alert. I glanced down and felt my stomach drop. It was a notification from the security system at my vacation home. Motion detected. Front door opened. I quickly checked the app. Someone had used a key to unlock the front door, but hadn't disabled the alarm system. The security company would be calling me any second to verify if this was an authorized entry. Sure enough, my phone rang almost immediately. "Miss Wilson, this is Safeguard Security. We've detected entry at your property on Pine Ridge Road. Is this authorized?" "No," I said firmly. "I'm not there and no one has permission to be there. Please send the police immediately." An hour later, my phone rang again. It was an officer from the local police department. "Miss Wilson, this is Officer Reyes. We're at your property on Pine Ridge Road. We have two individuals here who claim to be your parents. They have keys to the property but admitted they don't have permission to be here." I closed my eyes, confirming my suspicions. Yes, they are my parents, but they absolutely do not have permission to be in my house. "I understand. How would you like us to proceed? We can remove them from the property, but since they used a key rather than forced entry, it's a bit of a gray area for charges." "I'll come up there," I decided. "My husband and I can drive up now. We're about an hour away." The drive was tense. I alternated between anger and disbelief. How could they do this? After I explicitly told them no, they tried to move in anyway. Who does that? When we pulled up to my vacation home, there was a police cruiser in the driveway. Two officers were standing outside. Sitting on the front porch steps were my parents, looking miserable. Several suitcases and boxes were piled beside them. My father stood up when he saw us. "Tessa, thank God you're here. Tell these officers there's been a misunderstanding." I got out of the car and approached the officers, ignoring my parents for the moment. "Thank you for responding so quickly. These are indeed my parents, but they do not have permission to be here." One of the officers nodded. "Ma'am, do you want to press charges for trespassing?" My mother gasped. "Tessa, you wouldn't." I turned to look at her. "You broke into my house after I specifically told you no. What did you think would happen?" "We didn't break in," my father protested. "We used the key you gave us." "This is all your fault," my mother suddenly shouted, standing up. "If you had just let us stay here like we planned, none of this would have happened. We wouldn't be standing here being treated like criminals." I stared at her, shocked by the outburst. "My fault. You gave away a house I was paying the mortgage on without consulting me, then tried to take over my property without permission, and somehow this is my fault." "You're so arrogant," Mom continued, ignoring my point. "So irresponsible. We raised you better than this. We gave you everything." "Mom, stop," I said, my voice low. "You're embarrassing yourself. You and Dad just tried to break into my house to move in after I explicitly told you no, and now you're standing here in front of police officers yelling at me about how I'm being irresponsible." That seemed to get through to her. She abruptly closed her mouth, but her eyes were still full of indignation. I turned back to the officers. "I'd like a word in private, please." We stepped away from my parents and Mark. "I don't want to press charges against them," I said quietly. "They're still my parents, even if they're being absolutely ridiculous right now. But I can't have them staying here either." The officer nodded. "We understand. Family situations can be complicated. We can take them to the station for a few hours, give them a stern warning about trespassing, then release them. Sometimes a few hours in a holding cell can be a good reality check." I considered this. That might be the wake-up call they need. "Yes, please do that." I walked back to where my parents were sitting. "The officers are going to take you to the police station for a few hours. I'm not pressing charges, but I want you to understand how serious this is. You cannot just move into someone's house without permission, even if you're family." The car with the police and my parents left. While we waited for the locksmith, I arranged for my parents' belongings to be taken to a nearby storage facility. I paid for 1 month and texted the details to my sisters, since my parents' numbers were still blocked. The locksmith arrived and changed all the locks. By the time we left, the house was secure again. On the drive home, I felt drained but also strangely liberated. For the first time in my adult life, I had stood up to my parents' manipulation and refused to be taken advantage of. Mark glanced at me. "What do you think they'll do now?" "Probably go crying to Lely," I guessed. "She can deal with them. She got the house. She can take the responsibility that comes with it." I wasn't naive enough to think this was over. Knowing my mother, she would find a way to make me look like the villain in all this. She always did. I was right. A week later, I opened Facebook to find a long, dramatic post from my mother. It had already gathered dozens of sympathetic comments from relatives and family friends. Today, I learned what it means to be abandoned by your own child. It began. My husband and I, in our golden years, have been cast out like unwanted pets. Our eldest daughter, Tessa, had the police remove us from her vacation home like common criminals, leaving us with nowhere to go. The post went on, conveniently leaving out the fact that they had given their house to Lely, that I had been paying their mortgage for years, and that they had tried to move into my vacation home against my explicit refusal. As I scrolled through the comments, people calling me heartless, cruel, ungrateful, something inside me snapped. I started typing my own post in response. It was time for everyone to hear the whole truth. I've stayed silent about family matters until now, but since my mother has chosen to make our private issues public, I feel I need to share my side of the story. Here are the facts that were conveniently left out of my mother's post. For the past 5 years, I had been paying the mortgage on my parents' house because they couldn't afford it due to health issues and reduced work hours. I did this willingly because they were my family and they needed help. 3 weeks ago, at my sister Lely's wedding, which I also helped pay for, my parents announced they were giving their house, the one I had been paying for, to my sister as a wedding gift. They did this without consulting me or even giving me a heads up. When I finally spoke to them after the wedding, they informed me that they had planned to move into my vacation home, again without asking me first. They had apparently worked this all out with my sister before her wedding. She would get their house, and they would take my vacation property. When I refused to let them move into my vacation home, they attempted to move in anyway. They used a spare key I had given them for emergencies and triggered the security system. That's why the police were involved. I didn't have them arrested, despite what my mother's post suggests. I did have the police remove them from my property because they were trespassing. I then paid for a storage unit for their belongings. If my parents needed a place to stay, perhaps they should ask my sister, who now owns a 4-bedroom house, thanks to them and me since I paid for it. I added a final paragraph. I've always done my best to help my family, but I won't be taken advantage of or painted as a villain for refusing to give up my property after already paying for theirs. Family goes both ways. It's about mutual respect, not just taking whatever you want because we're family. I hit post before I could second-guess myself. Mark read it over my shoulder and gave me a thumbs up. The response was immediate. Comments started rolling in from cousins, aunts, uncles, even some of my parents' friends. But unlike the comments on my mother's post, these were supportive. I was completely unaware that you were covering their mortgage. That's really unjust of them. Wait, they gave away a house you were paying for. I felt exhausted most of the time, but I should have felt vindicated. Even though I was only defending myself, it didn't feel good to disclose this whole thing publicly since it was so taxing. My cousin Jessica gave me a call 2 days later. She said, "Hey, I wanted to check on you. Your parents tried to go back to their house. Lily's house now, but she wouldn't let them in." I straightened my posture. Seriously? Yes, she apparently informed them that there was no place for them because it was now her home. They now live in a subpar apartment, and your mom had to return to full-time employment in order to pay the rent. I was unsure of how to react to that. I felt that they were deserving of it. This was the predicament they had put themselves in. However, a sympathetic side of me persisted. Even though they had mistreated me, they were still my parents. I relayed Jessica's words to Mark when we hung up. "It's just karma," he said. "Yeah," I said, "but I don't feel as satisfied as I thought I would." "That's because you're a good person, Tessa," Mark remarked. "Unlike some people we could mention. My parents made many attempts to get in touch with me over the course of the following few weeks. I couldn't bring myself to respond when I saw their names on my phone. I wasn't prepared. The pain was too recent. Do you think you'll ever forgive them?" Mark asked me one evening as we were getting ready for bed. I considered it, perhaps one day. For my sake, not for theirs. It's not good to carry around all this resentment. And Lely, he questioned. I let out a sigh. That is more difficult. She was aware of their plans. She participated in it. When they needed her, she turned them away. Mark drew me in and whispered, "At least you know where you stand now. No more illusions about who's important to them and who isn't." He was correct. Even though the entire experience had been excruciating, the facade had been ripped away. For years I had been striving to be as special to my parents as Lely was in order to gain their approval. I realized now that would never occur. Oddly enough, that awareness was liberating. My mother called me again the next morning. I left it on voicemail this time. Tessa. Her voice had changed. Smaller, less difficult. We were wrong. A large one. You have every right to be furious, and I am aware of that. But do give us a call back. We must speak. Without returning the call, I erased the message. If they were offering to apologize, I may be open to hearing it someday. Perhaps in the future, I'll be prepared to welcome them back into my life with new conditions and restrictions. Not today, though. I should have learned to prioritize myself a long time ago, but I was still learning how to do it now. I made the decision to put my vacation house up for rent. It would be good to have the extra money. Additionally, I like the concept of the location being utilized and appreciated rather than being vacant as a reminder of everything that had transpired.